Hello, everyone. It is nice to see you at the tail end of Digital Dragons. I appreciate you making it. And congratulations to all of our fantastic nominees and award winners last night. It was my first gala. I really enjoyed it. I'm here to talk to you today about building accessible communication. So, first of all, I'm Alicja Zapalska. I'm a copywriter at CD PROJEKT RED. For anyone who can't see me, I'm a white brunette in my late 20s. Today I'm wearing a gray t-shirt with small text that reads CD PROJEKT RED Team. So I've been at CDPR for almost 2 years now. And in that time, we've grown our accessibility efforts considerably. The communication team, which I'm a part of, has attended accessibility trainings, given trainings, written alt text, audio description, descriptive text, and more. And lately, we've been heading up efforts to introduce accessibility standards across our entire marketing and communication departments. But none of that existed 2 years ago. So to a certain subset of gamers, our communication was a bit of a black box, in that we were sharing information that they were unable to access or understand. So to start this talk about accessibility off, I'm going to show you a bit of an inaccessible asset, a look at one of our trailers from the perspectives of various gamers with disabilities and how they might understand our content. Now, if you can't hear anything or see anything at certain points, do know that that is by design.
Tell me, do you copy?
So that was a pretty big picture, broad view of what certain disabilities or people with disabilities might see or hear. But obviously disability is a spectrum, which is why I want to start with our first point about understanding disability and what we mean when we talk about it, to create a sort of framework for ourselves going forward. And after that, I want to get into the meat of the talk, which is accessibility building blocks. So the various ways that we can make our communication accessible to people. Whether it's someone who couldn't hear what that trailer was trying to say, or couldn't see the screen, or couldn't see the screen fully, and so on. And then I want to end with a bit of a difficult question, a bit of a provocative one too, which is, why bother? If this is something you're asking yourself during the bulk of this talk, I hope that at the end we can create an answer that makes sense. And if you're someone who wants to introduce accessibility efforts onto your teams, this is a question you might be asked, in which case, together, I'm hoping we can come up with a good answer. So, let's set our base first and talk about what we mean when we talk about disability. So let's go back to the 1970s and first look at the social model of disability, which was originally sort of posited at that time. And it's been accepted by a variety of parties, notably the Convention on the, oh, I forgot the name. The Convention, wait, here, I'll give you the quote and I'll remind myself this very long name. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So this is the quote, and what it tells us is that disability results from the interaction between persons with impairments and attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinders their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So let's break that down a little. Our two most important things to think about here are attitudinal and especially environmental barriers. And what the social model of disability also tries to tell us is that impairment is not the same thing as disability. It is by the interplay of environmental and societal factors or attitudinal factors that it becomes a disability. So we can think of that in the context of someone with a temporary impairment. Maybe they've broken their leg and are in a wheelchair for the time of their recuperation. And on a daily basis, they go out and about on the metro. But the elevator at their local stop doesn't work. So they have no way of accessing that metro. So their impairment, which is to be being in a wheelchair for this time being, becomes a disability. You can also think of that in the context of video games, button mashing, a hot button issue, if you will. If you're someone with poor motor control, and you're unable to press that button fast enough and it results in a fail state in the video game, that particular environmental factor raises your impairment to a disability. So when we create accessible communication, we are removing the environmental factors that impact persons with impairments. I will be saying person with disability and so on, various forms, apologies, but let's get into our actual accessibility building blocks now that we've set a bit of a foundation. So how in marketing do we remove these environmental barriers? There are a lot of different ways that we communicate with players. And so our first step at CDPR was identifying the key ways that we do that. First of all, social media is a massive one. We have Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, even a Tumblr, I think. And of course, another one is trailers. So now that we know, for example, where our players are finding us and where we're finding our players, we want to think about the effort versus the impact of creating accessible communication. So how much effort are we putting in, and how much is it helping people with various disabilities to understand our content? For example, social media, which I'll start with, is a pretty low effort and a pretty high impact way to start. Next question, of course, is the relevant teams. On a larger company, like CD PROJEKT RED, we have a whole community team dedicated to our social media, and we worked with them in implementing accessibility. So our guiding principle was to start small and then work our way up into various forms. So first thing we did, like I mentioned, is our social media. And the best way to make social media accessible to everyone is through alt text. In short, alt text is a concise description of an image used when an image cannot be seen. It's actually a cornerstone of internet design, back from the days when internet coverage wasn't as reliable as it was now. So it was more likely for a video, or sorry, image in this case, to not load. So the alt text would tell you what image you were supposed to see. Nowadays, it's available on most social media, pretty much all of the major platforms. And because it's meant to be concise and not overly verbose, it's a pretty natural starting point for our journey into accessibility. Because, as I mentioned, at CD PROJEKT RED, we have a variety of social media accounts. These are just 3 of our Twitter accounts for Cyberpunk 2077, The Witcher, and our studio account. Of course, you can add to that the various different platforms we operate on and the various different languages that we communicate in. And on that social media, we share graphics, fan art, contests, fun facts, and a lot of what we share is visual. So it can be difficult for everyone to understand. Here's one of my favorite examples from before we started using alt text in our images, which is this tweet, telling people that The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt free next-gen update comes out in 2 days. But the entirety of what we've written is an emoji sword and an emoji sword. So what happens when you can't see this image? I'm going to play a recording of a screen reader. For those who haven't heard it before, it's a bit of a robotic-sounding voice that reads all available information on a screen. And it's commonly used by blind or low vision users, and someone who uses screen readers on a daily basis might in fact set them to a dizzying 300 words per minute, but I have slowed it down to about 30. So let's take a listen.
Square profile picture, link, The Witcher verified account at Witcher Game Crossed Swords, image 241 replies.
So that's a little transcript to help follow along. We know that we're looking at a verified account, that the handle is Witcher Game, and we know that the tweet contains 2 crossed sword emojis, and that there's an image. But all of the key information that we actually want people to know is locked away in that image here. So alt text helps add that meaning back in, and it could be as simple as The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt free next-gen update releases in 2 days. And now we've conveyed everything that we want to, and it is accessible to even more people than it was before. So, like I mentioned, we worked with our community team, who were really enthusiastic about adding this form of accessibility into our social media. So our first step was organizing a training in which we went through what alt text is, how to write it, best practices, and basically we talked with them also what it would look like for us to implement it. And our first step after that, was identifying a solution and figuring out how we could do this across the various channels that we have. So our solution was a button. If you're familiar with Trello, you may know that it has useful automation features. And a lot of our social media accounts our social media calendar, that is organized through Trello. So what we did was we talked with our entire community team, and we created a little button that they can press once they've uploaded all the images into the calendar. And they flag me down and two other people who I've politely redacted to tell us that the text is ready for alt text. So we go in, we write it, and then they're able to upload that image. And it also helps us know, by when they'll need that alt text. So if they flag us down maybe a month in advance, we have some time to get it written. But in general, alt text actually doesn't require a lot of effort. I would say a maximum of 2 minutes is how it takes me on average to describe a single image, and that's usually if it's a very text-heavy image. Otherwise, a minute. All you have to do is make sure that your key visual information is being conveyed in your alt text. So there aren't one-size solutions, but I think one of our key things was making sure that we maintained ownership of this project and of the way we were implementing accessibility. So because of that, we were able to create, or to be able to follow the certain standards that we set for ourselves in our accessible communication. And by maintaining ownership, we can then provide those same quote-unquote services to other teams. For example, our website design team or our other teams like our employer branding team who don't use social media as regularly. And of course, we had to find a solution that fit our needs. For a smaller team, for example, it might make more sense to disperse the sort of alt text writing knowledge and make sure that everyone is responsible for their piece of the pie. But for us as a larger team, we were really happy to have a more centralized approach. So that's where we are today. That's basically what we do with all of our alt text and social media accessibility. And once we sort of had this pretty comfortably set, we moved on to our next big project, our bigger project, which is video accessibility. And videos contain a lot more layers. You have both your audio and your visual information, which means you have to think a bit more holistically, apologies. One of the first ways to make videos accessible for especially deaf or hard of hearing individuals is to talk about subtitles and closed captions. So closed captions, I suppose you could think of as subtitles plus. They contain speaker tags, additional audio cues, and music information that you wouldn't find in regular subtitles. Unfortunately, at CD PROJEKT RED, we have our particular process of creating subtitles would mean that our closed captions would be a little labor-intensive. So actually, we first had to decide we want to do them, and currently we're waiting on a slightly neater system in order to be able to create closed captions. Depending on what sort of methods you use at your studio to create subtitles, adding closed captions might be easy and might be a pretty handy first step. Now, so that's what we're thinking about when it comes to the audio level of accessibility. When it comes to the visual level, we think about descriptive text and, of course, audio description. So descriptive text does what it says on the tin, and it's also a bit of a less popular method of adding accessibility. But it essentially describes a video in a text file or text format, scene by scene, the major events, the major characters, locations as they happen, so that someone who is unable to play that video or see what the video is can either read it for themselves or use a screen reader to read it. Now, audio description, on the other hand, is an additional audio file. Actually, I'm running a little ahead of myself. So here is one of our thumbnails with our official audio description. And that's what I want to tell you. I wanted to let you know that trailers for us, and especially probably for a lot of studios, are a pretty important part of our communication plans. They're how we convey a lot of major information, talk about gameplay mechanics, and they're also, just the video making process itself can be kind of time consuming when you're, deciding between two shots and so on and so on. And audio description can also be equally time consuming and a more complex project. So, to explain what audio description is real quick. Nope. There we go. It is an additional audio track, or an additional narrator who describes what is happening on screen and the characters and events and locations in between the dialogue of the actors themselves. And it does that it can either be toggled on or off, or it can be baked into the file itself and uploaded separately alongside your main trailer. And you will actually find audio description pretty often on streaming services. If you use Netflix, HBO, all of the other ones as well, I believe, you can toggle on audio description. most commonly in English, but there are, I believe, over 160 or 150 or so movies audio described in Polish on the streaming services as well. So, because the biggest use case for audio description is blind or low vision users, people may think that that's just who they're for, but there has been some research and look into it that it has overlapping use cases for example, individuals on the autism spectrum and people who, for example, are recovering from eye surgery and can't look at screens for long periods of time, people who suffer from migraines. So anyone who basically cannot look at a screen can be someone who makes use of audio description. You'll also find it in some AAA games. I think 2023 was a pretty notable year for having audio-described games. But you will also find, at least we've found, that it's not too common in marketing. Even on streaming services, which have all of this audio description available, they don't always upload audio-described trailers alongside their content. To me, I think that's a great room to innovate, and there's a lot of room for maneuvering, you could say. So at CD PROJEKT RED, when we upload our audio-described trailers, we do so alongside our main trailers, usually on the same day. So our Polish audio description and our Polish trailer are side by side, and our English audio description and our English trailer are side by side as well. So when it comes to writing audio description, I'll do a quick breakdown of what that process looks like internally. And of course, this might not make sense for everyone, so we can talk about that too. But first, you get the video. You write the script, and you iterate on the script until you're happy with it. And then we create a prototype, which isn't always done, but especially for small 3-minute videos like trailers, it makes a lot of sense to make sure that things are perfect as you go. So we create a prototype, we iterate some more, and the prototype, usually recorded internally, sort of put together internally, slap and dash way of making sure that everything makes sense. So after we've iterated, we then are happy, we've nailed it. We hire a voice actor, we send those audio files off to our audio and video teams, they put it all together, and we have a final version. However, I went too far. There we go. However, as I mentioned, audio description, in some of its use cases, is in large part for buy-in for blind and low vision individuals. So in order to make sure that your audio description is on the right track, you also want to make sure that it resonates with that target group. So their perspectives were pretty key for us in ensuring that we were making audio description that worked for them, which is why we were able to work with our internal UX team and create what we called a playtest, or more so a focus group of our trailers. So we invited blind and low vision individuals in Poland to take a listen to or watch one of our audio description prototypes and give us their feedback. So I'll show you a little bit of our English language prototype, although we worked with our Polish prototype there. So.
Her netrunner suit lit from the glow of the computer, Somi sits, her face immobile. White text on a black background, 7 years later. A presidential space shuttle orbits the Earth. The side reads, New United States of America. Inside sits Somi with new cybernetic implants.
Somi, you want a pill?
Arms fully chrome.
Somi,
Excuse me, Madam President.
pill? It's going to be a long flight.
No, thank you. I'm coming off.
A missile strikes the side of the shuttle. On fire, it crashes down towards Night City.
So, spoilers. As I mentioned, creating these prototypes meant that we could test them internally with our coworkers, and they could let us know obvious problems, like in this case, stepping over the dialogue, or perhaps the mix was too low. But our focus group was able to tell us what actually worked for them and how they were actually seeing and interpreting our trailers. So we asked them a bunch of questions, both on the technical side, or I say us, our UX team. And first, what we wanted to know was what they thought the game would be about after watching the trailer. So they said, the main character explores the universe while completing missions. There are political and espionage themes. And as this trailer was for our Phantom Liberty expansion for Cyberpunk 2077, which is a spy thriller themed in which you save the president, we were really happy to know that even on our audio description, that even with our audio description, the meaning of our trailer was coming across and was being understood. So we also asked what kind of emotions that trailer evoked. So curiosity, willingness to play, tension, interest, and involvement. Both of these comments, and obviously many others, let us know that we were on the right track when it came to ensuring that the kind of communication we were creating for individuals with disabilities matched the communication and the level that we wanted across the board. So we also had another comment from a visually impaired user, or I keep saying user, sorry, it's a bit of a habit from some audio description training. Now they said, I've watched a lot of trailers in my life, and here is the first time I've encountered audio description. I didn't realize before how much it does. Great that it's there. So I mentioned this in terms of my original point of not finding these kind of materials in marketing very often. And there is room to really work with the community and engage them. So after receiving a bunch of feedback, we went on to cast a professional voice actress, re-recorded the lines, improved the mix, and released it in the world. So here is what the final version looked like in comparison.
Her Netrunner suit lit from the glow of the computer. Somi sits, her face immobile. Red text on a black background. 7 years later, a presidential space shuttle orbits the Earth. The side reads New United States of America. Inside sits Somi with new cybernetic implants, arms fully chrome.
Somi, you want a pill? Somi,
Excuse me, Madam President.
pill? It's going to be a long flight.
No, thank you.
A missile strikes the side of the shuttle. On fire, it crashes down towards Night City.
Actually, one of the most notable changes you might have noticed was the color of the text. It went from being white to being red, other than some minor edits to make sure the dialogue was in the right place. But the reason that text was different was because we get to work alongside our video team when we make our audio description. So we get to see the iterations as they happen, and we get to write our script a lot earlier than someone who would be working externally. So we find that pretty helpful because, for example, if we know the trailer is about 90% locked, we can have most of our script ready and then just compare it to the final locked version, and in that case be ready to go as quickly as possible. Now, what it takes to create internal audio description is a little more labor intensive, like I mentioned. First of all, we attended multiple trainings. I myself was really lucky to train with some fantastic audio description professionals in the United States. And then we prototyped, which is something that maybe we did a little extra, not necessarily something everyone would have to do, but prototyping, sitting in on the recordings, coordinating with various teams, including audio, community, and video, and all of that to create our audio description internally, which we're really happy to do. However, depending on the size of your studio, there may be other solutions that make more sense. Apologies. So, third-party vendors. There are a lot of award-winning audio description providers who are able to do these sort of things on outsource, if you will. And what that would then entail is working externally, as I mentioned, but some interesting, I think, fun facts about audio description providers is that script writers, which are sort of your most important person to work with, charge roughly per finished minute. So if something is 3 minutes long, that means they would charge you X dollars times 3. And because if you're talking about a trailer, that is not going to be a lot of money, as audio description providers charge a maximum of $9 to a minimum of $1, which would then mean that they're doing something for $24, which is where you might get associated get-out-of-bed fees to make that worth their while. However, that's not to say you can, for example, perhaps discuss a package deal or a sort of a larger partnership, or look at a partial or full outsource with a freelance audio description provider. So there are individuals who are able to write the scripts fully themselves and voice them, or perhaps you could just have the script written and coordinate the recordings yourself, as obviously game studios are pretty good at coordinating recordings. So, a quick sum up. I would say we started small with alt text, and then we moved on to our descriptive text and took a pretty big swing with our audio description, which we're really proud of and continues to improve even as time goes on. But there are other forms of accessibility that might make sense for other companies, like closed captions, as I mentioned, starting with that instead of audio description. Now, to sort of do a quicker summary of other forms of accessible communication that might make sense for you, there's live audio description, which a lot of gaming conferences provide, or trade shows where you get all your big trailer announcements. A lot of them are audio described, and that is, as it says, audio description just done live by someone who is also watching. Pre-show audio description takes its idea from theater. When you're enjoying an audio-described theater performance, what usually happens is you have 10 to 15 minutes before the show starts. And during that time, the audio description provider will read out to you descriptions of the various characters, events, and locations, and how they change over the course of the play. And what that then means is that if they don't have enough time between the dialogue, they're able to, or someone who's blind or low vision is still able to keep up with what is happening in the script. There are transcripts, which I highly recommend, are great, especially if you're doing a lot of audio-heavy material, or audio only, if you will. And if you are capable of doing closed captions, transcripts are a really natural way to grow that particular accessibility direction. There's also sign language, and that also depends on sort of what your target group is, especially children. So children who are deaf or hard of hearing, or sort of part of the deaf community, might understand sign language a lot faster than they understand writing. In the same way that a young child would understand what you're saying, but not be able to read it out loud, or read it to themselves. So these are various ideas, things that could be pretty exciting to include. But I think what is key in all of this is being really transparent with your community as well. Because this was a question that I know came up multiple times when we were working with introducing accessible communication, which is, what if gamers expect a fully accessible game or a ton of accessibility options because you have accessible communication? And I understand that that can be a pretty stressful idea for people because you never want to mislead consumers. But a really great way to, of course, mitigate that one moment. Sorry, I keep getting ahead of myself. First of all, we'll get back to mitigating risk. First of all, what I want to mention is that by listing accessibility options wherever possible, you let players make the decision of whether this game is right for them. I consider this pretty important because when it comes to gamers with disabilities, oftentimes they don't have that information ahead of time. So what happens is they will pay up to $70 for a game only to find out that they can't make it past the menu screen. And of course, depending on what platform they bought that game on, that can be a big financial burden that you're asking someone to undertake. So a really key way of ensuring that you're really working with a community of gamers with disabilities is being transparent about what is in your game. So at CD PROJEKT RED, by the time we started our accessibility initiative, Cyberpunk was a bit of a known quantity already. However, we knew that with Update 2.1, we had in our scope additional accessibility features. So I contacted our player experience and safety team in order to create separate patch notes just for accessibility. So this post, even though we had previous accessibility posts, this one included everything all together and let people make a conscious decision whether our game was right for them. And so by being transparent, you are, as I mentioned, mitigating risk. You are telling people exactly what they can find in your game. And I will point out, personal anecdata, if you will, that I think the concern about people expecting the moon from your game is overblown. It's not something that we especially noticed when we added accessibility to our communication. But you also build positive sentiment. So I wanted to show off just a few of the different ways people responded. First of all, some people were excited that the game was now playable for them. Larger font options, larger HUD meant that it was something they might be able to play. We had general appreciation of transparency, and of course, additional accessibility options, which are always a win. And then, of course, there were people who looked through our accessibility options and said, there's nothing in here for me, but simultaneously were appreciative that those options existed. So I think even if you can't create something for everyone, there's a lot of positive sentiment, a lot of positive energy that goes just from being transparent and doing what you can. So I want to end this on a bit of a recap. It's a bit long, so I think I'm going to skim. Apologies. These are sort of the big picture groups that we can think of and the various ways that we might be able to support them. So visual impairments, hearing impairments, cognitive or developmental impairments, and then physical impairments. Most of these I've covered, but I want to take a quick moment to talk about physical impairments, so people with chronic pain, limb loss, poor motor function, etc. When it comes to the way we support them, it is less to do with how accessible communication is, but it can also be about the infrastructure that we build around our communication. So when you're thinking about your website and the way you're designing it, it might be worth looking at the web content accessibility guidelines to see to do a bit of an accessibility audit and look at the various ways you could perhaps improve it. So I will move on to our big question. If anyone is asking themselves, let's talk about it. So why accessibility? Well, there's the really nice answer, which is that it's a great thing to do. It is generally positive. It removes environmental barriers. It creates a more equitable internet that everyone can use. It's actually worth thinking about in terms of how we define the internet. I'll do a little brief legal aside about the Americans with Disabilities Act in the United States, which originally was created in the 90s and said that public spaces have to be accessible for people with disabilities. Recent court rulings have actually taken that Americans with Disabilities Act and interpreted it to say that the internet is a public space as well, which is actually why Netflix now provides audio description and closed captions. So I am not a legal person. I can't tell you how that law will continue to evolve or change, but it is worth thinking about that whether the law says it or not, the internet is a public space that we all want to make use of and we want everyone to be able to use. Now, on a more company side, growing your audience. I want to talk again about the curb cut effect for the first time. So the curb cut effect is named after a part of urban planning, urban design, what have you, that says creating something positive for one person helps them all. So if you're crossing the street, you may notice that the curb doesn't just have a hard stop and in fact slopes down to make it easier for you to cross. That particular design was originally made for wheelchair users so that it would be easier for them to cross from one side of the street to the other. But in turn, it also helps women with children in strollers, people traveling with roll-on suitcases, anyone transporting a large amount of stuff on wheels. So the curb cut effect tells us that when you create something positive for one group, there's a knock-on effect for a ton of other users you didn't originally imagine. And so by doing that, you might be in a situation where your game is potentially accessible to someone, but your communication isn't, or it doesn't speak to them because it lacks some accessibility features. So by implementing these things, you can in fact find more people. It can be effective for larger franchises. If we're talking on the scale of creating video games, TV shows, comic books, I already said movies, books, etc., those other products may be accessible. And as I mentioned on streaming services, that will have audio description and closed captions, most likely. Books are often available in audio form. So you can find that audience at an earlier stage with your game and then funnel them out to your other products. You build goodwill, as I mentioned, and positive sentiment is something that we all strive for. And there's space for innovation. By that I mean, as I mentioned, there's not a ton of marketing that is accessible. It is obviously growing. It's something that is becoming more and more recognized. But now is a really good time to sort of enter the game and join the conversation. Because when it comes to accessibility, the sort of people who utilize it, who utilize accessible communication and work with it, are really looking to celebrate wins, and they are accepting of mistakes if they're made in goodwill. So this isn't a community that judges harshly for missteps, but instead really wants more people to enter the conversation and create conversations that more people can enter. So that is almost the end of my talk here. I just wanted to play for you guys our very last audio-described trailer that we had the pleasure of releasing, and then provide you with just a couple of resources that could be a good starting point.
Rated M for mature. Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay. Keanu Reeves speaks.
Welcome to Night City.
Tex reads an unprecedented revival, The Guardian. An unforgettable open-world experience, Polygon. Idris Elba strides forward.
Night City, the rules are different.
Max Tack drops in from an AV.
Stakes are higher. The only limit to what you can do
People dance. Musicians rock out on stage.
is what you're willing to become.
Flashes of characters with cybernetic implants.
Stronger,
A man with two blades attacks.
faster, better. Yeah.
Soldiers jump out of an AV. A bike explodes in midair. Bullets whiz by as enemies shoot guns and lasers. An imposing battle tank is illuminated in red light.
So go ahead and play. But don't forget,
A space plane crash lands.
the future is yours for the taking.
Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition. Buy now for Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and PC.
I swear that wasn't an ad. I really do just enjoy that audio description. So I didn't recommend it, but you could have also watched that with your eyes closed and seen how that experience was. So maybe if you leave here, I recommend giving a show a try. If you're, for example, doing laundry, you can put on audio description and see how that experience is for yourself. Now, so when it came to those resources, I just wanted to provide a couple examples. First of all, WebAIM, which shows various ways that people with disabilities use the internet to give a sort of a helpful starting post. The WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, for looking into how to make your websites more accessible. And then a post from the Perkins School of the Blind about alt text, which provides some quick tips and rules for writing audio description. Now, thank you, everyone. When I rehearsed it, this was at least 10 minutes longer, so I hope you appreciate the extra time. And that'll be it from me, unless there are any questions. Thank you again.
Hey, of course, I have one. In the spirit of transparency that you mentioned, we are teammates. So no one's like, yeah. But I had actually, this was the first question that came up to my mind when you guys came with the idea of producing accessible as assets, was like, stereotypically you would think, this is video games. Like if you low vision, or if you're blind, unfortunately, this is not something you would probably be doing. And how much did it take for you to actually convince, people like me, for example, that it is something worth doing? And I'm also thinking, CDPR, as we are quite a large studio compared to the others, and I can imagine, being a small or an independent studio, it's way harder to find, resources to actually be able to produce all of that. So first of all, what did you say? Like, guys, why are we doing it, and why do we want to be doing it? And then how can they start doing stuff?
Great question. I did not feed him that question. He's really taken me by surprise here. I would say, first of all, we do talk about this, and because we do believe in this, that this accessibility is helpful for everyone. And it was sort of a key thing that we reminded everyone, talking about all these various use cases in getting people on board. And I think there's also worth thinking about the fact that your game may not be accessible, or you may think you have really limited accessibility options. But gamers with disabilities also have various third-party solutions, various ways that they play their games that they enjoy. So even if you think something might not be accessible for them, and of course you should listen to feedback and find out if it is, they may be playing it anyway, even if you didn't imagine that they would be. Most of all, we really believe that accessibility is for everyone, and we have a really supportive team who is really great at helping us with that. Not to mention, because we do so much of this internally, we're able to say, oh, it's totally cost-free, don't worry about it. And of course, that always helps. No, of course, recordings and there's things like that. But we do things internally, and we learned how to do them really quickly and effectively. Other than that, for smaller studios, of course, I don't think everything is feasible. it's an effort versus impact question. It's worth asking yourself. But I think that there are really useful things that we can do to sort of bring the conversation forward and improve accessibility. Again, just by being transparent, even if you're not able to implement accessible communication, you're really raising or sort of improving the conversations that we have around games. And not to mention, I think starting with something like alt text may be easy, maybe not. You take a look into it, see how easy it is for you to implement. And of course, if it's not at this stage, maybe it will be down the line. So it's worth keeping in mind that way at least. Of course, I hope that answered your question, Gersh.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for asking. All right, I think that might be it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me on this talk. That's a QR code for you if you'd like to use it again. Another QR code, that is. All right, I'm letting you go. Thank you.